Hey, welcome back to Kinshasa today. You know how it is living here. There's always something big happening, something everyone's talking about, and sometimes it feels like you need to be a lawyer just to keep track.
Yeah, absolutely. It can get pretty complex.
Well, that's exactly what we're diving into for you today.
That's right. We've been digging deep into a major legal and political story unfolding right now in Kinshasa. It involves the former Prime Minister, Augustin Matata Ponyo.
And specifically his ongoing prosecution, right?
Exactly. And maybe more significantly, the recent intervention by the President of the National Assembly, Vital KAMERE. It's really stirred things up.
Okay, so the big question we're tackling, the core of this deep dive, is this. In the legal process against Matata Ponyo, are we actually respecting the constitutional protections that, our elected members of parliament are supposed to have?
That's the nub of it. And it's not just about this one case, is it? It has potentially serious implications for the rule of law, separation of powers, all of that here in the DRC.
Definitely. So where are we getting our information for this breakdown?
Well, we've gone through a bunch of reports from our own Congolese press, outlets like Media Congo Press, Acture 30, Le Potential, Infos.cd, reliable local sources.
Right.
And we've sort of sifted through the various takes and details to pull out the key information to help make sense of what's happening.
Great. Okay, let's get into it. Maybe start with the basics. The Bukanga-Lonzo case itself. What's the story there?
Right. So Augustin Matata Ponyo, he's being prosecuted over alleged misuse of funds. This relates to the Bukanga-Lonzo agro-industrial park project.
Ah, yes, I remember that. That was a huge initiative back when he was prime minister.
Exactly. It was meant to be a big deal for, agricultural development. So these allegations, they touch on national priorities, which makes it quite sensitive.
And this case isn't entirely new, is it?
No, not at all. It's important to remember the legal process actually kicked off during the previous legislative session. Back then, Matata Ponyo was a senator, and his immunity was lifted by the Senate at that time, specifically to allow this investigation and prosecution to proceed.
Right, so the wheels were already turning. But now things have taken, a pretty sharp turn this week with Vital Kamerhe stepping in. He's the current president of the National Assembly.
Precisely. So on Wednesday, April 30th, just this week, he sent a formal letter. It went to Dieudonné Kamuleta, who's the president of the Constitutional Court.
Okay, a direct communication between the heads of the legislature and the top court. What did it say?
Well, the reports say the letter expressed Kamerhe's really strong concern. He apparently called the continued prosecution of Matata Ponyo, now that he's a sitting MP, a firm violation of the Constitution.
Wow, firm violation. That's strong language. Coming from the head of the National Assembly, that carries weight. What's his argument based on?
It's rooted firmly in our Constitution, specifically Article 107. Kamerhe quotes it directly in his letter. He's highlighting the parts that protect MPs, parliamentarians, from prosecution or arrest during their term. Unless their chamber, in this case, the National Assembly, gives its authorization.
Right. Okay, so Article 107. Can you break that down a bit for us? What are the specifics?
Sure. It's actually quite detailed. First, it covers opinions or votes made while doing their job, absolute protection there.
Okay, standard parliamentary privilege.
Exactly. Then, it talks about prosecution or arrest during parliamentary sessions, unless someone is caught literally red-handed, the flagrant délit, the National Assembly has to authorize it.
Got it. And outside of sessions?
Similar protection. An MP can't be arrested without authorization from the Assembly's leadership, the Bureau. Again, exceptions are flagrant offense, or if prosecution was already authorized before they took office, or if there's a final conviction.
Okay, so Kamere's point is
What?
that the National Assembly hasn't given this authorization now that Matata Ponyo is a deputy in this legislature.
That's exactly it. He specifically reminded President Kamuleta, according to the reports, that no deputy can be prosecuted, arrested, or even sought out while doing their job without the National Assembly saying yes first.
And he linked this to recent events in the Assembly.
Yeah, he apparently mentioned the plenary debates from April 17th, 2025, the big sessions where everyone's there. He argued it was clear from those discussions that Matata Ponyo was being pursued and judged without his current immunity as a deputy being lifted.
So Kamerhe is essentially saying the Constitutional Court is bypassing a necessary constitutional step.
That's the core of his argument. He reportedly described this lack of prior authorization from the National Assembly as an unavoidable constitutional lock, a vero constitutional inconturnable.
A lock the court has to respect.
That's his position. He's saying the court is legally bound to respect this law. It really throws a spotlight on this potential friction point and how our system is supposed to work, balancing accountability for past actions with protecting the legislature's independence now.
So while Kamerhe is making this case, what's happening with Matata Ponyo himself and his legal team? How are they reacting?
Well, they've taken a pretty drastic step. They've decided to start participating in the constitutional court hearings altogether.
Really? Why?
Their stated reason is quite serious. They're alleging political manipulation. They claim the court process is being steered unfairly, aiming for a conviction regardless of the facts or law.
That's a huge accusation against the judiciary. What's the Constitutional Court saying in response to Kamerhe's letter and these allegations for the defense?
Well, reports suggest the court's president, Dieudonné Kamuleta, has a different perspective. He's apparently indicated that, look, the National Assembly hasn't actually officially come to the court asking about lifting Matata Ponyo's immunity as a current deputy.
Ah, so a procedural point from the court side.
Seems like it. And he also reportedly pointed out that, this case was already ongoing before Matata Ponyo became a deputy in the December 2023 elections.
Okay, so this is where it gets tricky. We know his immunity was lifted before by the Senate. So what's the actual legal sticking point here?
The crucial issue, and this is Kamerhe's main argument, is that Matata Ponyo's status has changed. He's now a deputy in the National Assembly.
A different chamber, a different legislative term.
Exactly. So Kamerhe argues a new process is arguably needed. The National Assembly itself would have to authorize the continuation of the prosecution or lift his immunity as a deputy. The old Senate waiver from a previous legislature might not be enough now.
But couldn't the argument be made, perhaps from the court side, that since the process started legally with the Senate waiver, it can just continue, regardless of his new role?
That's certainly a possible counter-argument and likely part of the court's reasoning. It hinges on interpreting Article 107, and precedent: does the immunity attach personally and continuously, or is it tied specifically to the seat and the chamber currently held? It's a complex legal question.
So let's say Kamerhe's interpretation holds up. If he's right about Article 107, requiring a new authorization from the National Assembly, what does that mean for the trial?
Well, if his interpretation is deemed correct, it could potentially invalidate the ongoing proceedings at the Constitutional Court. It would mean they've been moving forward without meeting a key constitutional requirement.
Which would be a huge blow to the case itself.
Absolutely. It would raise serious questions about the legitimacy of the whole process against him, at least from this point forward.
And this clearly goes beyond just Matata Ponyo. It touches on fundamental principles, right? Like the separation of powers you mentioned earlier.
Definitely. It really puts the spotlight on that delicate balance between the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive. Parliamentary immunity isn't just a perk. It's designed, in theory, to protect elected representatives from potential harassment or obstruction through legal means, allowing them to do their job independently.
So it's about protecting the institution of Parliament itself.
That's a key part of the rationale behind it, yes. Preventing legal cases from being used as political weapons against sitting legislators.
Now, this is obviously a high-profile, controversial issue. What are people saying? What's the reaction been like, maybe online or just generally here in Kinshasa?
Well, if you look at the comment sections, like under the Media Congo Press article, for instance, you see a real mix of opinions. People commenting under names like Patriot B, Kaweli, Columba, Pericles. They have very different takes.
Which is expected, I guess.
Totally. It's important not to take online comments as representative of everyone, of course, but you do see certain themes popping up in the discussions.
Like what?
Concerns about tribalism potentially playing a role, questions about whether the judiciary is truly independent or if it's facing political pressure, and just a general anxiety, about the state of the rule of law in the country.
So it shows people are definitely paying attention and are quite concerned about how this plays out.
Very much so. It touches on fundamental issues of justice, politics, and governance that matter to people.
And while all this back and forth is happening, there's a clock ticking, isn't there? Something about the court's timeline.
Yes, absolutely. The Prosecutor General at the Constitutional Court has reportedly asked for a significant sentence, 20 years in prison, for Matata Ponyo and his co-accused.
20 years?
Yeah. And the court is expected to deliver its final verdict quite soon, by May 14th.
May 14th. So that adds a real sense of urgency to this whole immunity debate raised by Kamerhe.
Definitely. The timing makes this intervention even more critical. We're heading towards a conclusion in the trial just as the head of the legislature is raising fundamental constitutional objections.
Okay, so let's try and wrap this up. We've got a former Prime Minister, Matata Ponyo, on trial for serious charges related to the Bukanga-Lonzo project. That process started when he was a senator.
Right.
But now he's a deputy. And the President of the National Assembly, Kamerhe, is forcefully arguing that the Constitution, Article 107, requires the Assembly's permission to continue prosecuting him in his current role, permission that hasn't been sought or given.
That's the absolute core tension right now. You have the judiciary proceeding with a major case, and the head of the legislature saying, hold on, you haven't followed the constitutional rules for dealing with one of my members.
And the court seems to be saying, we started this properly, and the Assembly hasn't formally raised the issue with us anyway.
Exactly. It highlights this incredibly complex intersection of law, politics, and constitutional procedure here in the DRC. And understanding these details, these arguments, it's pretty vital if you want to follow what's really shaping events in Kinshasa and the country.
It really is. It pushes you to think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What does this whole debate around Matata Ponyo's immunity, this clash between branches of government, really tell us about the actual balance of power in our country right now? And how consistently is the rule of law being applied?
Those are the big questions, absolutely. Food for thought.
Definitely something for all of us to mull over, maybe even prompt us to, take a closer look at our Constitution and how these different parts of our government are supposed to interact.
Couldn't agree more.
All right, that brings us to the end of this deep dive on the Matata Ponyo case and Kamerhe's intervention. This has been Kinshasa Today, episode 017. Thanks for tuning in.